Top news for today, January 8, 2021. President Duterte approves the forging of deals with the national government, LGUs, and vaccine manufacturers. The government says it will ensure the safety of Filipinos in Washington, D.C. following the riots at the U.S. Capitol. Malacanang says there is no need for President Duterte's blessing to resume talks on charter change. And the DOH joins calls for devotees to observe the Feast of the Black Nazarene at home. Good day, I am Rom Dulfo. Welcome to PNA Newsroom. Our top story, the national government will now work hand-in-hand with the local government units and vaccine manufacturers in formulating a solid immunization program against COVID-19. In line with this, the government will adopt a whole-of-society and whole-of-government approach in the implementation of a vaccine roadmap. Chris Mundo with more.
President Rodrigo Duterte has approved the government's proposed tripartite agreement with the local government units and vaccine manufacturers. National Policy Against COVID-19 Chief Implementer Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr. said the initiative is similar to the tripartite agreement signed between the national government, the private sector, and pharmaceutical companies in November 2020. He said the parties came together to maximize their manpower, expertise, and resources to ensure a coordinated, integrated, and holistic COVID-19 immunization program. The tripartite agreement is aimed at providing unified and synchronized efforts among the government, LGUs, and vaccine developers to ensure the acquisition of sufficient doses of COVID-19 vaccines for the country. Galvez said the national government will provide necessary resources to help LGUs purchase equitable vaccines for their constituents. He cited the significant role of LGUs in the upcoming implementation of the nationwide vaccination program. Some LGUs earlier expressed their own intentions to get vaccines using their own funds. Meanwhile, Galvez said the government will adopt a whole-of-society and whole-of-government approach in the implementation of the vaccine roadmap. He noted that LGUs are part of the government's efforts to further scale up the country's vaccine roadmap and timeline. Once vaccines are available, he said the government will utilize the hub-and-spoke model in the distribution of the COVID-19 vaccine, during which they will need the support and collaboration of the LGUs. The government targets to vaccinate about 50 million to 70 million individuals this year. The government will carry out a strategic framework of the National Vaccine Roadmap, which will prioritize the inoculation of healthcare workers as well as members of vulnerable sectors such as senior citizens. For the PNA Newsroom, I'm Chris Mundo.
LGUs will have to comply with the national government's prioritization list in purchasing their own COVID-19 vaccines. Presidential Spokesperson Roque explains only the national government and the interagency task force can decide on which areas and sectors will be given priority. Roque said Metro Manila, Calabarzon, Cebu, and Davao will be among the areas prioritized in the government's vaccination campaign, since these have the highest number of COVID-19 cases. Frontliners, including healthcare workers and uniformed personnel, as well as the elderly and those with comorbidities, will also be prioritized. He also reminded LGUs that they have to procure vaccines through tripartite agreements with the national government and pharmaceutical companies. Roque earlier welcomed efforts made by some LGUs to allocate funds to secure COVID-19 vaccines for their constituents. A lawmaker is urging the government to allow the private sector to acquire and purchase COVID-19 vaccines for their employees and their families. Deputy Speaker Rufus Rodriguez filed House Resolution 1453, which invokes the right to health of every Filipino as guaranteed by the Constitution. Rodriguez also filed House Bill 8301, which would exempt vaccines to be purchased by the private sector from import duties and other fees. Rodriguez said that 72.5 billion pesos set aside in the 2021 national budget for COVID-19 vaccines will cover only 30 to 50% of the country's population. He argued this is far from the 70 to 80% herd immunity level the Department of Health wants to achieve. Several business and industry leaders earlier committed to purchase 2.6 million doses of vaccines from AstraZeneca, half of which will be for their workers and the other half will be donated to the government. The Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, or POEA, is eyeing to stop the deployment of Filipino healthcare workers abroad. POEA Administrator Bernard Olalia said this is to protect overseas Filipino workers in light of the threat of the new variant of the COVID-19 in other countries. Meantime, the POEA will ask for the opinion of health experts and hold consultations on the matter. They will also ask for a recommendation from the Department of Labor and Employment whether it will implement a temporary suspension of overseas employment. The Philippine government is monitoring the safety of its citizens in the Washington, D.C. area after supporters of outgoing U.S. President Donald Trump stormed the U.S. Capitol to protest the election results. Presidential spokesperson Roque assured that the government will prioritize the safety of Filipinos living in Washington, D.C. He said they expect the embassies and the consular office in Washington, D.C. to monitor and report immediately if any Filipinos have been hurt or involved there. Citing DFA Secretary Ted Locsin, Roque said he believes the U.S. can handle the violence that erupted in its capital. Philippine Ambassador to the U.S., Jose Manuel Romualdez, advised Filipinos in the Washington, D.C. area to stay home following reports that some Asian Americans have joined the protests. On Wednesday, thousands of Trump supporters convened in front of the White House to call for the overturning of the 2020 election results. 4 people died during the pro-Trump protests. Still to come, Malacanang says there is no need for President Duterte's blessing to resume talks on charter change. The Agriculture Department says it can reach its harvesting target of 20.4 million metric tons of palay this year. More on these from the PNA Newsroom continues.
Sa matinding laban natin sa Coronavirus Disease 2019, sugpuin din natin ang pagkalat ng fake news. Huwag magbahagi ng impormasyon na hindi tiyak ang pinagmulan. I-check mabuti ang source ng balita. Kumuha lamang ng impormasyon mula sa mga official channel ng Department of Health. Huwag magpadala sa maling balita, basta't sama-sama at laging handa. Kaya natin to. Isang paalala mula sa DOH, PCOO, KBP at ng himpilang ito. Pangalagaan ng sarili laban sa Coronavirus Disease 2019. Hanggat maaari, umiwas sa mataong lugar. Iwasang hawakan ang ilong at bibig, maging malinis sa katawan at ugaliin ang wastong paghuhugas ng kamay. Takpan ang ilong at bibig kung uubo o babahing. Umiwas sa mga taong nagpapakita ng sintomas ng coronavirus disease gaya ng lagnat, ubo at sipon. Magsuot ng face mask kung kinakailangan. Basta't sama-sama at laging handa. Kaya natin to. Isang paalala mula sa DOH, PCOO, KBP at ng himpilang ito.
You're also watching PNA Newsroom. Thank you for joining us. Malacanang says the House of Representatives does not need the blessing of President Rodrigo Duterte to resume discussions on charter change. Presidential spokesperson Roque says the palace respects the decision of the lower chamber to restart public hearings on Chacha. However, he also said the president and his administration will still prioritize efforts to curb the spread of COVID-19 in the country and implement its economic recovery plan. Roque also dismissed the new rumors that the House's Chacha is a move to extend the terms of officials, including that of President Duterte. Another possible amendment is the removal or amendment of the party list system, which the president floated to solve the problem of the CPP-NPA and its party list allies in Congress. House Committee on Constitutional Amendments Chairperson Alfredo Garbin Jr. said his panel would resume deliberations on proposals to liberalize the Constitution's economic provisions next Wednesday. Malacanang believes the death of the 23-year-old flight attendant Christine Saras in a Makati hotel is not a case closed. This despite the Philippine National Police saying it has solved what it declared as a rape slay case. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque explains the Makati City Prosecutor's Office said it needs more evidence to prove that 23-year-old Sarah was raped and killed. To date, police had not yet submitted DNA analysis results, toxicology and chemical analysis, and histopath examination. Roque, meanwhile, said President Duterte assured that justice will be rendered for Sarah and her family. Makati Police Chief Colonel Harold Depositar said the initial report of the cause of death was a ruptured aortic aneurysm. However, there are other factors to play as Sarah had lacerations, contusions, and scratches on her body and lacerations and sperm in her genitals. Justice Secretary Manardo Guevara earlier said the NBI will be looking closely with the police in connection with Sarah's case. Meanwhile, sympathy and support poured in for the family of the late flight attendant Christine Angela Sarah, whose body was flown home to General Santos City on Thursday morning, a week after she was found dead in a hotel room in Makati City. Relatives and friends trooped to St. Peter Chapels in Barangay Apopong to condole with the Sarah family and show their support to calls for justice. Sharon Rose, Christine's mother, said they are overwhelmed with the support extended by residents, including LGU officials, amid their ordeal. She also thanked PAL Express, Christine's employer, for its support. Sharon said they will not stop until all those behind her daughter's death are jailed and convicted for the crime. Sharon said they have reason to believe that there was foul play in Christine's death. In business, the Department of Agriculture on Thursday said the 20.4 million metric ton palay harvest target set by the PSA this year is achievable. DA Undersecretary Ariel Kayanan says the rice industry achieved the 19.44 million metric tons of palay harvest in 2020 despite the challenges faced by the agriculture sector. Kayanan said the palay yield for the 2021 projected by the PSA is due to the ongoing implementations that were strategized under the National Rice Program. The DA has scheduled to distribute almost 2 million of seeds and nearly 5 million fertilizer bags to rice farmers for 2020-2021. Agriculture Secretary William Dar also used the 8.5 billion peso Rice Resiliency Project Fund to finance the Plant program in 16 rice-producing regions in the country. Up next, the DOH joins calls for devotees to observe the Feast of the Black Nazarene at home. And the organizers of the Sinulog Festival cancels this year's public cultural events. The PNA Newsroom returns after these reminders.
Tandaan ang tamang paraan ng paghuhugas at paglilinis ng kamay upang makaiwas sa iba't ibang karamdaman. Basain ng tubig ang mga kamay at sabunin. Unang sabunin ang mga palad at ang likod ng mga kamay. Kuskusin na maigi ang pagitan ng mga daliri at maging ang mga kuko. Isunod ang pagitan ng mga hinlalaki at kuskusin ng paikot ang mga dulo ng mga daliri sa magkabilang palad. Banlawang mabuti ang mga kamay sa malinis na tubig at patuyuin ang mga kamay gamit ang single-use towel o air dryer. Basta't sama-sama at laging handa, kaya natin to! Isang paalala mula sa DOH, PCOO, KBP at ng himpilang ito. Alamin ang mga dapat gawin sa lugar ng trabaho laban sa Coronavirus Disease 2019. Ang mga kumpanya ay dapat magbigay ng face mask sa kanilang mga empleyado. Bukod dito, magbigay kaalaman din patungkol sa COVID-19. Siguraduhing malinis ang kapaligiran. Maglagay ng sabon at hand sanitizer sa mga palikuran. Siguraduhing ligtas at nalutong maigi ang mga pagkain sa kantina. Obserbahan ang kalusugan ng mga empleyado at katrabaho. Kung sakali man na mayroon silang sintomas ng coronavirus disease, gaya ng lagnat, ubot sipon at hirap sa paghinga, ay agad ipasuri sa doktor. Basta't sama-sama at laging handa, kaya natin to! Isang paalala mula sa DOH, PCOO, KBP at ng himpilang ito.
The Health Department has joined calls for the public to refrain from visiting Quiapo Church on Saturday to celebrate the Feast of the Black Nazarene amid the pandemic. Despite the cancellation of Traslacion 2021, officials of Quiapo Church, headed by Reverend Monsignor Hernando Coronel, reported that they are still expecting an influx of devotees for the image viewing of the Black Nazarene. Coronel said preparations have been made to ensure strict adherence of all devotees to minimum public health standards. Coronel, however, emphasized that the best way to protect oneself is not to physically attend the events and instead find alternative ways to commemorate the annual feast. The DOH called on families to instead attend online masses held hourly through the Quiapo Church's Facebook page. Earlier, Coronel appealed to other parishes under the Archdiocese of Manila to celebrate masses for the Feast of the Black Nazarene on Saturday. The church rector asked the Apostolic Administrator of Manila, Bishop Broderick Pabilio, for churches to hold at least one Eucharistic celebration for the feast. The organizers also introduced the localized celebration of a feast where the image of Black Nazarene visited cities and provinces. Coronel also urged devotees to let go of the tradition of walking barefooted during the feast. Aside from the cancellation of public activities, the Black Nazarene will only be placed outside the balcony of the Quiapo Church for devotees to see and pray to the image. In our foreign news, U.S. President-elect Joe Biden formally became the 46th President of the U.S. early on Thursday after Congress certified the votes of the Electoral College. Outgoing Vice President Mike Pence announced the 306-232 electoral vote count, officially affirming Biden and his running mate Kamala Harris as the winners of the 2020 U.S. presidential election. Before the landmark confirmation, Congress had rejected some lawmakers' objections to Pennsylvania and Arizona's electoral votes. Protesters supporting President Donald Trump later breached the Capitol building, interrupting the counting of votes. Meanwhile, senators did not join the House Republicans' objections against Wisconsin's electoral votes, which ended any further debate for lawmakers planning to challenge the results of the elections. Tokyo Olympics aspirants were given a virtual orientation on Thursday on safety protocols set for the bubble training at Inspire Sports Academy. The Philippine Sports Commission has set strict protocols to be observed by the 46 athletes and coaches inside the bubble facility in Calamba, Laguna this month. Athletes will undergo a series of RT-PCR testing and encouraged to restrict movement and interactions for 14 and 7 days, respectively. Delegates will be subjected to another round of RT-PCR tests inside the facility and will be billeted in isolated rooms. PSC Commissioner Ramon Fernandez, who led the online briefing along with Chief de Mission Nonong Araneta, reiterated that the safety of each athlete is paramount in bubble training. The Games have been rescheduled for July 23 to August 8, 2021, while the Paralympic Games will take place in August 24 to September 5. The organizers of Sinulog 2021 has decided to cancel major activities which may pose a risk for COVID-19 transmission. In a statement on Thursday, the Sinulog Foundation said it decided to forego with a street dance ritual competition. It, however, said the body is considering the holding of a safe and orderly Sinulog festival using online or virtual platform which spectators can view at home. The foundation vowed to coordinate with other agencies of government in holding a safe and orderly Sinulog festival this year. Sinulog Foundation's decision to cancel Sinulog events came after the Police Regional Office 7 and the Cebu City Police Office recommended allowing only religious activities or events of the Santo Niño Fiesta to avoid COVID-19 transmission. Take one more look at today's biggest stories. President Duterte approves the forging of deals with the national government, LGUs, and vaccine manufacturers. The government says it will ensure the safety of Filipinos in Washington, D.C. following the riots at the U.S. Capitol. Malacanang says there is no need for President Duterte's blessing to resume talks on charter change. And the DOH joins calls for devotees to observe the Feast of the Black Nazarene at home. Thank you for watching another episode of the PNA Newsroom. To check more news content, check our webpage or check the Philippine News Agency's Facebook and Twitter accounts. For more stories about the government and how it serves Filipinos, look for these hashtags in all our social media platforms and websites. We are shown on the pages of the PCOO and its attached agencies. Also watch us on television on PTV4 and IBC 13. And that's the biggest stories that you need to know from PNA Newsroom. We tell you stories that inspire change. I am Roque. Have a good day.